Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We need to talk briefly about the cost of housing in the UK. We already know that the cost of groceries, all sorts of different things like going out, everything is on the rise. But one of the biggest and most challenging things for most people to pay up for is their rent. It's usually rents, not mortgages, right? Mortgages are expensive, we know this, but renters specifically are absolutely screwed in this market. As a young person myself, aged just 21 years, I find this to be a really interesting way or time to look at the market and the way it's affecting the way people live, the way it's affecting the things that people can do. First though, we need to talk about what the main issue is. And again, this is true for mortgages and rents, but we'll talk mainly about rents because most people can't even get a mortgage, and we'll get to that in a second. Rents in the UK are now essentially extortionate in every single town that you live in. I don't live in a big city, not a major one, right? When I say major cities, I'm thinking Manchester, London, arguably Birmingham, right? Those major cities. I don't even live in one of those. I do live in a city. And it's quite interesting because for me to get any sort of a place that is, let's say, a one-person flat, you're looking at 6, 7, realistically 800. That is not a city centre place. That is not a particularly nice place. That is the reality of today's rental market. £600 to £800 is absolutely to be expected. You could be looking at figures even higher than that. I've heard about someone recently who's paying about £1,200 rent for their flat. There are alternatives such as living in house shares, but even some of those can go for as much as £800 or more depending on where you are. The cheapest house shares that I see nowadays are between £400 and £600. And when I say house shares, you guys need to understand, those who don't know, because a lot of old people don't seem to realise this. The fact that a house share is essentially, in a lot of cases, you have a one bedroom that's yours, and you live in a house which can contain as many as 15, 20 people, right? So at that point, you're paying £500, £600, £700 for a room. It really is quite worrying, and it's impacting the way that a lot of people are living. Now, I'll make this point from my perspective. I don't want to say how it feels for old people. I don't know, right? But for a young person, it's really interesting to see the way this is impacting. For a lot of my friends and colleagues, this is taking up half of their income, a third at least, right? More realistically, half. And when you factor in all bills, we're not even talking about food, clothes, or going out. Just your rent and your bills, half of your money's gone easily, if not more. And this is all for a place that you don't own, right? This is for a place that you will never own. You're paying this money in a lot of cases just to get to work. And we're seeing this impact our generation in many different ways. So many of us are choosing not to move out. It's just not worth it for a lot of people. So that can manifest itself in two ways. Number one, people don't want to work 40, 50, 60 hours and still be struggling to get by. You could make an argument that's lazy. You could make an argument that there are alternative life paths out there to make money, and I would somewhat agree. But the other way that we're seeing it impact people is, again, people choosing not to move out simply because they can't afford it, even if they do work as hard as they can. They don't see the point and they'd rather save money up, because in this market it's very difficult to say where things are going, right? Jobs are also very uncertain, which doesn't add any comfort to this situation, right? When you've got a position where young people aren't moving out from home at younger ages, it affects more than people like to think. That depth into living by yourself, adapting to becoming a fully fledged adult, comes with a lot of challenges. And whilst they are challenging, this is what helps us to grow. In this market where people are not moving out, either for necessity of survival or they just don't see the point, people are losing these essential skills and not having these experiences. You know, it's really quite worrying the way that the housing situation is. And that's just talking about rents. So a lot of people aren't happy, and I know a lot of people as well. This is true, I'm talking from experience. This is not some made up internet stuff. I know of people who, if their rent goes up 10, 15, 20%, they're finished, right? They are finished. They're back with their parents if they're lucky. If they are lucky. So where is the end in sight for this? When we've got professionals who are working full-time jobs, living with a partner or roommates and still struggling to get by. It doesn't really make much sense, does it? And it is obviously a very difficult position for many. So we can look at that angle, which is challenging enough. Then we can talk about mortgages. A lot of people on the channel say, if young people want to get cheap cost of housing, get a mortgage. And I will not lie, there is actually quite a bit of truth to this. I'm not saying it will be cheap, but by UK standards, you can arguably cut down your costs quite a bit. At the same time, the cost of houses themselves have been rocketing in recent years, pricing out more and more people from even getting onto the ladder in the first place. It's kind of creating this monopoly effect where landlords own more and more houses, big companies own more and more houses, and the average person owns less and less houses because they either get bought out because the prices have risen so much, or they just can't get into them in the first place, and they're forced to rent off of these landlords or big companies, whatever you want to say, right? That is the reality of a lot of people. So we've got that part of the situation, we've got that part of the equation. Then we've got the actual saving up for a deposit on a house. Sure, you could probably get a better price on a mortgage, but can you afford to put down 10, 15, 20 grand? We're seeing some of these mortgages now coming down with, 1% down, 5% down. That is true. That is true. But for a lot of people, even that is going to be a struggle now. And it's getting to such a point where, maybe 5-10 years ago, not even that long ago, the argument was, or could have been, just move to a cheaper town or a cheaper part of town. There are still cheap towns out there, of course. But then you've got to ask what you are paying for. You can go and live in somewhere like Blackpool or somewhere in the northeast or the northwest that's not a good town. Especially talk about this from the perspective of our young people. We are now in a catch-22 position, and this is not me complaining. I actually have alternative income streams online, but I'm just outlining this for more and more people to understand, because I know a lot of my audience are older people, and perhaps a young person's perspective might help here, right? So it's this kind of catch-22 situation. Old people say young people need to suck it up and move to a worse off town, but then they don't understand the professional ramifications that this will come with. If you want a job working in a shop or a warehouse, that's fine, right? No disrespect to anybody. If you're making a good, honest living for yourself, I respect you a lot, in any way. But a lot of our young people actually do want to do well for themselves here in the UK. A lot of young people want to become young professionals in all different sorts of industries. Where an issue starts to arise here is, you can't live in some of these towns and find good, stable, and frequent professional careers. Again, if you want to work in a warehouse, a shop, a factory, yes, those jobs are there. But a lot of young people have the qualifications, right? You don't work for a degree for 3-4 years, or a master's even, to work in a shop, a warehouse, or a factory. And your skill set doesn't mean that you need to. However, you want to get one of those higher paying jobs? Well, we're not in the time of remote working so much anymore. More and more companies are expecting people to come back into the office. So you need to live at least within a drivable or train distance of these towns. Now you're back in the rent cycle, right? Now you're back in the expensive rents. Do you see how this cycle continues, guys? And the thing is, it's getting worse and worse. I think that there is now a strong argument for the fact, if you do want to live in the UK, and again, I hear a lot of young people and a lot of even older people saying, I want to move to a different country. That's fine. Do what you want. Do what works best for you, right? And I've said this before. A lot of people make this argument that living in some of these cheap countries is good. Some say it's bad. Do what works best for you. I'm not going to give you guidance on how you should live your life. At the end of it, you're the one that's going to have the regrets, the happiness. It's none of my business. So live wherever works best for you. But the reality of it is this: if you want to live in the UK, you could make a very strong argument that trying as hard as you can, be it moving with parents for a bit, saving up a year's salary, 2 years, 3 years salary, and getting the deposit for a mortgage is your best bet. And then getting the best house that you can. Because this is a thing, and I'm not a negative person, I'm not a pessimistic person, but we've got to outline some obvious facts, right? We can talk about 1,200, 15, 2 grand rents, right? 2 grand rents seem pretty much unrealistic in the UK now. But I want to bear in mind, it wasn't long ago that we were hearing about this happening in London. Who's to say it's not going to happen in Manchester, or Liverpool, or Leeds, or Newcastle, or Nottingham, or anywhere else, right? Who's to say it's not going to happen there? It already happened in London. And you guys have seen your rents go up by X amount anyway, everywhere. So it's really quite a worrying situation. Again, I'm not complaining about this. I know a lot of people, especially a lot of older people who perhaps don't understand the market, they see my videos and they just go, "You're just complaining." I'm not complaining, guys. But two things can be true at the same time, right? I can say get on with it. I can say do your best. I can say look for alternative income streams or high income jobs. And I can also say, this is wrong. Because people are paying £700 in a lot of instances. I know of people who pay £700 to live in a room share, not a room share, but a house share with 14, 15 other people. And these are career professionals, good jobs, hardworking people. They're paying more than a mortgage to live in a room. So you could make a very strong argument that getting a house and owning one is the only way forwards, because it's really a challenging time out here, guys, for the working population, and especially for the renting population. Let me know what you think to this short video in the comments. The UK rents do seem to be out of control. Or is it just something that's fair, right? What do you think? Is it just supply and demand? Should people suck it up? People are going to have all different sorts of opinions. I want to know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you think to this video and this topic, and I hope I'll see you again soon. Goodbye for now. See you later.